The third thing we need to talk about, and it's this: disorganized gatherings, church services, community events inside the church. Disorganized gatherings, they actually dishonor God and dishonor others. And I'm gonna give you two examples of this. One is very strange, one will make a bit more sense, so hang with me. We're in 1 Corinthians chapter 11 now. Look at what Paul says, and hang with me, okay? Because this is gonna sound like it's coming out of left field. It's gonna sound a bit archaic, so hang tight. Every man who prays or prophesies with his head covered, a man with his head covered, okay? Think of a hat on, okay? Although Paul's thinking more than that, he's also thinking long hair. Dishonors his head. If his head is covered, how is he dishonoring his head? Paul's doing a word play here. It's very hard. This section is so hard to translate. Great Jesus-loving people disagree on this. But Paul's trying to make a connection inside of this word play. He has this head covered, but there's a different head that he has, a different authority, one above him that he submits to. All right, this is gonna unfold as we read a little bit more. But every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head. It's the same as having her head shaved. All right, this is very strange. Hang with me. The first thing I need you to know is Paul is not saying something that would somehow suppress women in the local church. He's saying if a man prays or prophesies, or if a woman prays or prophesies, all right, they both have roles. All right, this is important. They're doing the same thing in this context. Now, this section is unfolding inside of a much larger context that I just don't have time to cover, but I certainly didn't want to skip it because I wanted to shed some light on this section, okay? So we have two different scenarios. A man with his head covered is somehow dishonoring something, and a woman with her head uncovered is somehow dishonoring something. So both have the responsibility to honor. The section goes on. For if a woman does not cover her head, she might as well have her hair cut off. Okay, just cut off. Now this is very interesting. Prostitutes in the first century shaved their heads. And so it's a bit confusing here. Is Paul saying that a woman with a shaved head in the first century would be very confusing to people because it looked like a prostitute was here, and when people went to the temple to have sex with prostitutes with shaved heads, and people in the first century local church, this church, they have shaved heads, are people thinking, wait a second, is this all about the same thing? Is this just like that over there? Is he talking about that? Or is he saying that when you have your head uncovered, ladies, in the first century church, it's such a sign of disrespect, you might as well go all the way and just shave your head. It's a very challenging passage, but I hope to clear it up. He says, but if it is a disgrace for a woman to have her hair cut off, this is an interesting thing. If it is a disgrace, this is our textual clue to understanding this passage. If it is a disgrace, women should not act in a way that's disgraceful. It's the same thing for men. And so what he's saying is, if in your culture this behavior is disgraceful, you should abstain from it. Why? Because organization honors. He's bringing organization into this. So you have to ask the question as you interpret this for your culture, our culture, is it the same amount of disgrace? Not so much. Although if you come from the South where men take their hats off when they pray and are in church, you might come to SMCC, see some people with hats on and think, that seems disgraceful. Hang with me, all right? We're gonna work through all this. If it is a disgrace for a woman to have her hair cut off or her head shaved, then she should cover her head. Then she should. Why? To not act in a way that's disgraceful or distracting or disorganizing to the local church. So this is a very strange section. It's very hard to translate because there are times where the Apostle Paul uses head metaphorically. There's times where he uses it as actually your dome and what's on top of your head, your hair. It's a bit tricky to work through, but like I said, this certainly isn't a section that's, making women sound like they're somehow less valuable. This is far more about order and organization than value. So how do we work through this? Well, we have to remember this. Every culture has certain symbols that communicate certain things that are meaningful inside of the culture. Every culture has that. And in many cultures, the symbols are different. Like, did you know in Bulgaria, nodding your head like this means no, and shaking your head like this means yes. It's the exact opposite of our culture. So if you were to go there, you would have to translate your behavior and translate what this means. So too we must do it with this passage. We have to translate these cultural symbols into our culture to really understand what Paul is getting at. Some people read passages like this in the Bible and say things like, that was just that culture, therefore we don't have to pay attention to it. That is not what we get to do at all. We say, what did it mean in that culture? And we translate it to say, what does it mean in our culture? There's something very relevant here that the Apostle Paul is talking about. We're going to translate it the best that we can.